A golden retriever collapses on a stranger's porch in the middle of a thunderstorm, but what happens next will break your heart and then heal it. A little boy says the dog spoke to him in a dream and led him deep into the woods to uncover a secret no one was supposed to find. But someone else is watching, and he wants that secret buried forever. This isn't just a rescue story, it's a mission, a message, a miracle. Evergreen, Oregon had never looked so bruised. The sky hung low with thunder, the wind knifed through the birch trees, and the streets shimmered with reflections of lightning that cut jagged across the dusk. Rain battered rooftops with a relentless rhythm drumming against windows as if demanding to be let in. Jessica Moore stood by the front door of her modest home, arms folded tightly around herself. A single mother in her mid-30s, Jessica carried the tired elegance of someone who had spent too long holding up her world with her bare hands. She was tall, willowy, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a loose bun, and eyes the color of early morning fog. Her world had narrowed to two constants, her work at Haven Hills nursing home, and her 8-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan sat cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring in a sketchbook with fierce concentration. He was a quiet child with soft features, sandy brown curls, and wide eyes that always seemed to be watching something beyond the visible. Since his father left 3 years ago, Ethan had become even more inward, retreating into dreams and drawings, especially during storms. That night, as thunder rolled like distant artillery, Jessica moved to check the back door. That's when she heard it. A scratching. Not the frantic scrabble of tree branches, but a deliberate, almost rhythmic sound. She froze. Another scrape. Then a low, barely audible whimper. She moved cautiously toward the front door and peeked through the small side window. There, slumped on the porch and soaked to the bone, was a large golden retriever. The dog's head was bowed, its body curled tight against the cold and its fur plastered to its frame. Mud streaked its sides, and a deep cut ran along one hind leg, dried blood mingling with rainwater on the wooden floorboards. Mom Ethan's voice was small. "Something's out there." Jessica hesitated. Taking in a stray, especially an injured one, wasn't a small risk. But when she looked at the dog's eyes, half-lidded amber filled with exhaustion and something like pleading, she felt something crack open. She unlatched the door and stepped out into the rain. The dog didn't move. "Hey there," she said gently. "You hurt." Still no movement. Jessica turned to Ethan. "Grab a towel, the big one from the laundry basket." Ethan darted off and returned moments later. Together they approached the animal slowly. Jessica knelt, draped the towel over the dog, and gently pressed her fingers near the wound. He flinched but didn't growl. "He's not aggressive," she murmured. "Just tired." Jessica stood, her voice low but firm. "We're bringing him inside." She and Ethan lifted the dog with care, his body heavier than she expected, as if he carried not just weight but weariness. They laid him gently by the fireplace, where the warmth immediately began to steam the rain from his fur. Jessica gently closed the door behind them, locking out the storm. The golden dog, still dripping wet, looked up at Ethan with tired amber eyes. Ethan knelt beside him and noticed a worn leather collar barely visible beneath the soaked fur. There was a tag, rusted, scratched, but just legible. Bailey Ethan read aloud. He smiled softly. "That's your name, isn't it?" The dog let out a faint huff, almost a sigh, and rested his head against Ethan's knee. "Welcome home, Bailey," the boy whispered. Jessica watched this small exchange, a lump rising in her throat she hadn't expected. She knelt beside them, wiping more mud from the dog's fur fingers, finding old scars beneath the newer wound. "You've been through something, haven't you?" she whispered. That night, the three of them stayed close. Jessica brought out an old blanket for Bailey. Ethan offered the last of his peanut butter crackers, and the storm raged outside like some angry beast being held at bay by the fragile peace inside the house. Before bed, Ethan asked quietly, "Mom, do you think he came here for a reason?" Jessica brushed hair from his forehead. I think sometimes the ones who need saving find the ones who need to save. And as Ethan drifted off to sleep beside the fireplace, one hand resting lightly on Bailey's back, Jessica sat alone with the storm, watching the dog breathe slow, steady, and trusting. She didn't know then that he had already chosen them. The storm had passed, but the air in Evergreen still held the damp scent of pine needles and wet asphalt. Outside Jessica Moore's modest home, the morning sun pressed weakly through thick clouds, casting a silvery glow over the neighborhood. Inside, the scent of coffee lingered in the kitchen, competing with the smell of wet fur and antiseptic cream. Bailey lay curled on the sky-blue blanket near the fireplace, his breathing slow and steady. A bandage wrapped around his flank, covering the gash Jessica had carefully cleaned the night before. He hadn't made a sound, hadn't growled or whimpered, only watched with quiet dignity as she and Ethan moved around him. He was large for a golden retriever, likely a few years older than most rescue strays, with graying fur around his muzzle and deep-set eyes that never seemed to blink too long. Every movement he made was measured, deliberate, like a soldier still unsure if he'd left the battlefield behind. Jessica poured a bowl of cereal for Ethan, who was still in his pajamas, his hair sticking out at odd angles. The boy sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging under the chair spoon, clinking against the ceramic bowl. His gaze kept drifting toward Bailey. He's dreaming, Ethan said quietly. Jessica looked over. Bailey's paw twitched slightly, and his nose wrinkled as if catching a scent only he could recognize. I guess dogs dream too, she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Not like this. He talks to me. In dreams. Jessica froze mid-step. Ethan, I know it sounds weird, he said, eyes never leaving the dog. But I saw him, in the woods, and there was an old man there. He was sad. He kept whispering Bailey's name, but he didn't say Bailey. He said, Shadow. Jessica set the coffee mug down, her hands slightly trembling. You had a dream, baby. That's all. Ethan turned to her with those impossibly blue eyes that always made her feel like he could see through whatever adult explanation she offered. It wasn't just a dream, Mom. It felt real. Like Bailey wanted me to see it. Jessica didn't respond. She was still trying to figure out how she'd let a strange dog into her house during a thunderstorm. Now her son was claiming to communicate with it in dreams. She glanced at Bailey again. He had settled back into stillness, his eyes half-lidded but alert, as if listening without eavesdropping. Later that morning, after dropping Ethan off at school, Jessica headed to work at Haven Hills Assisted Living Center. The building sat on a hill overlooking the eastern part of Evergreen, framed by old oak trees and ivy-covered fences. Inside it smelled like lemon cleaner and chamomile, a strange but oddly comforting combination. Jessica had worked there for almost 6 years, mostly in the memory care wing. It was quiet sometimes, achingly so, but she found comfort in the routine's meals at 8, 12, and 5, medication rounds at 10 and 3, soft music in the afternoon. The residents became part of her life like forgotten family members, fragile, gentle souls drifting between the past and present. One of them was Mr. Delaney. Harold Delaney was 83, tall but stooped with wispy white hair and a wardrobe of plaid shirts he insisted on tucking neatly into his slacks. A retired librarian and Korean War veteran, Mr. Delaney had long struggled with memory loss. Most days he didn't remember where he was, and some days he didn't even recognize his own name. But he had a kind demeanor, never combative like some, and he often sat by the window reading books he no longer comprehended. That afternoon, Jessica found him in the sunroom staring out toward the trees with a distant expression. "Hi there, Mr. Delaney," she greeted gently. "It's a gray one today, huh?" He didn't answer. She was about to turn away when he suddenly spoke. Shadow. His voice was dry, raspy, like paper rubbing paper. Jessica turned back. "Pardon?" He looked right at her, clearer than he had in weeks. Shadow. The dog. "Is he with you?" Jessica froze. What did you say, golden fur? Big eyes. Used to sleep by Jack's chair. Mr. Delaney blinked as if shaking off a fog. He was always quiet. Good listener. That dog never barked unless it mattered. Jessica's throat tightened. Who's Jack? Mr. Delaney leaned back in his chair, eyes misting over again. Jack Sullivan. Used to bring Shadow to visit. Back before they stopped letting dogs in. Jessica felt her heart skip. That name, Sullivan. It had been on the dog's old tag. Bailey. Shadow. Had belonged to someone. He's still around, Mr. Delaney asked suddenly, his voice sharp again. I don't know, Jessica said softly. I think he's looking for someone. Mr. Delaney nodded slowly, then slipped back into silence. The spell was broken. Jessica spent the rest of her shift in a fog. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfolding, something far beyond coincidence. A dog with a wound. A child dreaming about a man named Jack. An elderly resident speaking a forgotten name with sudden clarity. When she picked Ethan up from school, he ran to her as usual, but instead of talking about class or friends, he asked one thing. Can Bailey come next time? Jessica blinked. Come where? To school. I think he misses the kids. That night, Bailey sat beside Ethan as he did his coloring homework. Jessica watched from the kitchen, trying to make sense of it all. The dog hadn't barked once, hadn't begged for food. He followed commands without being taught. And when Ethan rested his head on Bailey's side, the dog didn't shift or move. He simply closed his eyes, content. Jessica's phone buzzed. It was a message from Haven Hill's staff. Mr. Delaney had asked twice that day if Shadow was coming back. She looked at Bailey, then at Ethan. Something had begun, and it wasn't finished yet. The air in Evergreen had turned crisp and golden, the kind of late autumn chill that hinted winter wasn't far behind. The sidewalks were scattered with fallen maple leaves, and the morning fog clung stubbornly to the edges of fences and rooftops. Jessica zipped up Ethan's jacket and handed him his small backpack before locking the front door. You sure you're okay going to school without Bailey today? She asked with a smile, brushing his hair off his forehead. Ethan nodded, though his eyes lingered on the dog lying calmly by the living room window. Bailey's gaze followed Ethan as if memorizing the boy's steps. He said he'll be here when I get back. Ethan replied softly before hurrying down the walkway toward the waiting bus. Jessica stood for a moment, watching her son disappear around the corner. She still wasn't sure what to make of his dreams or the strange things he claimed Bailey told him, but she had stopped dismissing them outright. Later that morning, she bundled Bailey into the car, gently laying him across the back seat on Ethan's blanket. The local veterinary clinic, Timberline Animal Care, was tucked at the edge of town near a grove of Douglas firs, its wood-paneled facade giving it the look of a cabin rather than a medical office. The front desk was manned by a cheerful woman in her 50s named Tracy Hammond, whose reading glasses dangled from a beaded chain around her neck. With her messy bun, deep laugh lines, and warmly direct manner, Tracy had been the heart of the clinic for over 2 decades. Who have we got here? She asked, as Jessica carried Bailey inside. Jessica crouched beside the dog. I don't know much. He showed up during the storm. No collar at first, but I found a rusted old tag in his fur. Thought maybe someone microchipped him. Tracy reached down to scratch behind Bailey's ears. Well, aren't you a handsome boy? Bailey didn't flinch, just wagged his tail softly. Dr. Alan Bishop, the clinic's veterinarian, soon emerged from the back room. He was in his early 60s with a white beard trimmed close to his jaw and eyes that always seemed a little too tired to match his sharp mind. Years of long nights with sick animals had carved deep grooves into his face, but there was a gentleness in his hands that animals always seemed to trust instantly. As he examined Bailey, checking his pulse, eyes, gums, and healing wound, he murmured calming words under his breath. Finally, he pulled out a handheld microchip scanner and ran it along Bailey's neck and shoulders. A weak beep sounded. Bingo, he said, frowning at the display. Well, sort of. There's a chip, but it's a first gen, very old, and it's not transmitting full data. Let me try the tag. Jessica handed over the rusted metal disc. Dr. Bishop wiped it gently with alcohol and held it under the light. It's hard to read, but I think it says Bailey, property of Jack Sullivan. There's no phone number. Jessica's breath caught. That name again. Dr. Bishop looked up. Does it mean anything to you? She hesitated, then told him everything. The storm, Ethan's dreams, Mr. Delaney's moment of clarity at Haven Hills, and now the name. I think Bailey belonged to someone who might have been a veteran. Someone named Jack Sullivan. Dr. Bishop scratched his beard. That's possible. Dogs like him were often trained for therapy or service work after deployment. You're not the first to walk in with a story like this. Later that evening, after picking Ethan up and sharing the news over dinner, Jessica sat at her old laptop and logged into the internal records system for Haven Hills. The files were slow to load, but eventually, she found herself looking through a list of past residents in the Memory Care and Veterans Wing. There it was. Jack Sullivan, admitted 9/14, treated for PTSD after honorable discharge, age at intake 70, no known family, assigned therapy group alongside Harold Delaney. Jessica leaned back, goosebumps rising on her arms. She clicked through more records. Jack had attended group therapy for nearly a year before being listed as discharged against recommendation nearly 6 months ago. No forwarding address, no contact. She closed the laptop slowly. Somewhere between the data entries and Ethan's dreams, the picture was coming into focus. Bailey had belonged to Jack. Jack had been close to Mr. Delaney. And now, Mr. Delaney, whose memory rarely lasted an hour, had spoken his dog's name after all this time. That night, as the wind whispered across the roof and the last leaves fell from the backyard oak, Ethan came into the living room and laid down beside Bailey. Was Jack your person? He asked softly. Bailey's eyes met his. The dog gave a low huff, rested his head on Ethan's chest, and closed his eyes. Mom, Ethan said, not looking away. Bailey was with a soldier. I think Jack's in trouble. Jessica felt the chill again, not from the weather, but from a quiet voice inside her whispering, this isn't just about a lost dog. The skies over Evergreen wore a somber gray veil, a cold breeze whispering through the birch trees that bordered the town. It was the kind of late autumn morning that lingered with silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of dry leaves skittering across the roads. A storm had passed the night before, leaving behind puddles and the scent of damp earth. Jessica stood at the front porch with a thermos of coffee in hand, watching Bailey sitting unusually still by the edge of their yard. His golden coat, damp and wind-tossed, shimmered faintly under the thin sunlight. Inside, Ethan had been uncharacteristically quiet since breakfast. He kept staring out the window, fingers fidgeting with a thread on his sweater. Then suddenly he stood up, walked toward the door, and said, He wants to go now, Mom. Jessica blinked. Bailey. Ethan nodded. He says there's something we need to see. Jessica raised an eyebrow torn between amusement and that familiar twinge of unease. She had learned not to ignore her son's intuitions lately, especially since Bailey arrived. Without another word, she grabbed their jackets and boots, and within minutes, the trio was walking toward the woods behind their neighborhood. The birch woods loomed ahead, tall, slender trees, standing like pale sentinels over a carpet of fallen leaves. Bailey led the way, not bounding playfully like most dogs, but with measured, almost reverent steps, nose close to the ground, tail held steady. They walked for nearly half an hour, deeper than Jessica had ever dared venture with Ethan before. The trail narrowed until it disappeared entirely, but Bailey pressed on with certainty. Just as Jessica was about to call out and suggest turning back, Bailey stopped at a small clearing. There, half hidden under ivy and thyme, stood an old wooden cabin. The structure was plain and unremarkable gray weathered boards with a slight lean to the right. One shutter hung crooked, and the roof had a patch of moss growing over one corner. A rusty horseshoe still clung to the wall beside the door. Bailey sat and looked back at them. This was his place, Ethan whispered, stepping forward as though remembering something he'd never been told. Jack's. Jessica stared at the boy. What did you say? Ethan turned to her eyes clear. Bailey used to come here with Jack. They buried something. Under the floor. Jessica hesitated. Her hands were cold not from the weather, but from a creeping sense that something larger than she understood was unfolding. Still, she reached forward and gently pushed open the cabin door. It creaked on rusted hinges. Inside was a single room with sparse furnishings, a broken table, a narrow cot with a moth-eaten blanket, a small wood stove caked in soot. Dust floated in the shafts of light coming through cracks in the walls. Bailey walked to the middle of the room and pawed at the floor. Ethan followed him, then knelt and pointed. There. That board. Jessica knelt beside them. One of the floorboards looked different, less worn, a slight warp on the edge. She pulled out her pocket knife and carefully pried it up. Beneath was a small canvas-wrapped bundle. Inside, folded meticulously, was an American flag. Alongside it was an old black and white photograph, 3 soldiers in jungle fatigues, rifles slung over shoulders, mud on their boots, and exhaustion in their eyes. And there was a small leather journal with a broken clasp. Jessica opened it carefully. The first page read, Property of Jack Sullivan. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. Please take care of my dog. He knows where to go. Her breath caught in her throat. That afternoon, Jessica visited the local hardware store where she asked for Tom Riley, a local handyman who had worked on many homes in Evergreen. Tom was a thick-set man in his early 60s with white sideburns, calloused hands, and a voice like sandpaper. Yeah, I remember, Jack, Tom said, wiping his hands on a rag. He was quiet, real polite, the kind of man who always paid in cash and never stayed long. Came to me months ago asking if I'd help fix a few floorboards in a cabin he said was his retreat spot. Didn't say why, but I remember he brought that dog Bailey, I think he called him. Never left his side. Jessica showed Tom the journal. Then he meant it. Tom said, his voice low. He said if he didn't make it back, someone might find it one day. That's probably what you found. Back at home that evening, Ethan sat in the living room, the folded flag resting on his lap. Bailey lay beside him, one paw touching Ethan's foot. He remembers everything Ethan said softly. Bailey's heart never forgot. Jessica sat beside them. We'll keep it safe. Everything Jack left behind. It's part of him. Part of Bailey, too. Ethan looked up, a solemn seriousness on his young face. Jack trusted Bailey. And now Bailey trusts us. Jessica wrapped her arms around them both, feeling the silent, unspoken weight of that trust settling into their home like a new foundation. The cold returned to Evergreen with a quiet vengeance. The days grew shorter, and the early sunsets cast long shadows across the streets. The Turner house, nestled at the end of Ashwood Lane, stood in fragile stillness most nights until the wind whispered too long against the windows, or Bailey's low growl broke the silence. It began subtly. Jessica noticed the first sign one evening while bringing in the recycling bin. The gate to the backyard, which she always kept latched, was hanging open, creaking gently in the breeze. At first, she blamed the wind, or perhaps Ethan had forgotten to close it during the day. But something didn't sit right. Bailey had been restless that night, his ears perked at every small noise, his nose pressed to the bottom of the front door, as if scenting something just beyond. The following morning, she found fresh footprints near the back porch, too large to be Ethan's, too irregular to belong to the mailman. Jessica's anxiety grew, but she tried to brush it off, not wanting to scare her son. Still that night, Bailey refused to sleep in his usual corner by the fireplace. Instead, he lay stiff and silent in front of Ethan's bedroom door, his golden frame coiled like a sentinel, his eyes never closing for long. That same night, Jessica caught a glimpse of a figure outside, the shape of a man standing across the street, half obscured behind the neighbor's maple tree. When she turned on the porch light, he was gone. She called the police the next morning. Officer Lauren Mitchell responded. A woman in her 40s with shoulder-length chestnut hair streaked with silver. Lauren carried herself with practiced calm. She wore no makeup, her expression always serious, but never unkind. Jessica explained everything. The open gate, the footprints, the figure. Lauren listened carefully, then nodded. "You're not the first person on this street to mention strange activity," she said. "A few houses down, someone reported their shed was broken into 2 weeks ago. Nothing was taken, but the door was busted. And a week before that," Lauren paused, flipping through her notes, "someone broke into a cabin just outside the Birch Woods." Jessica's blood turned cold. "You mean Jack's cabin?" Lauren's brow furrowed. "You know it?" Jessica hesitated, then nodded slowly. "That's where we found something Jack left behind. Something important." The officer looked at her more intently now. "We think whoever did it was looking for something. There was damage to the floorboards, fresh boot prints. Whoever it was didn't find what they wanted." Jessica glanced at the living room where the journal and flag were still stored, safely locked away. "I think we did." Lauren made a note. "I'll put a patrol on your block for the next few nights. And if Bailey notices anything strange, let me know. Dogs like him, they know when something's wrong before we do." That afternoon, Mrs. Conway came by. She wasn't carrying her usual scowl or her pruned garden shears, but instead a plate of still warm cinnamon cookies. For Ethan, she claimed, though she handed them to Jessica without ceremony. Mrs. Conway was a thin, stooped woman in her 70s with hair like ash and eyes too sharp to miss anything. Her late husband had served in Vietnam, and since his death she had become both recluse and observer of the neighborhood's every detail. "I hear you've been having visitors," she said, watching Jessica with hawk-like precision. "Not the kind we invite." Jessica replied, her voice wary. Mrs. Conway sighed. "I should have warned you sooner. Jack had a nephew, Lucas Grant. Showed up about a month after Jack went missing. Claimed the cabin should go to him along with everything Jack owned." Jessica narrowed her eyes. "And the court threw it out. Jack's will left everything to charity. Lucas didn't like that. Stormed out of the courthouse, never came back officially." Jessica felt a chill crawl up her spine. "You think he's looking for what Jack left behind? I think people don't give up when they think they've been robbed. Especially men like Lucas, entitled, angry, and not too bright." Jessica thanked her and watched as the old woman hobbled down the porch steps, the cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. That evening, Jessica locked every door and window herself. She double-checked the bolts, made sure Ethan's nightlight was working, and moved Bailey's bed to the hallway again. But Bailey didn't need the invitation. He had already stationed himself in front of Ethan's door, unmoving and unblinking. Around 2:17 a.m., Jessica woke to a soft thump. Not loud, but distinct. She crept out of bed, her heartbeat steady and slow. Bailey was already on his feet, hackles raised, head tilted toward the back of the house. Jessica followed him quietly. She peered through the kitchen blinds. Nothing. Then she turned toward the back window and saw the motion sensor light blinking on. A figure darted past the edge of the property, disappearing into the darkness. Bailey let out a low growl but didn't bark. Jessica's breath caught. She didn't call the police this time. She called Lauren Mitchell directly. Minutes later, the cruiser arrived. Jessica greeted Lauren at the door, whispering so as not to wake Ethan. Bailey stayed close, ears still twitching. Lauren walked the perimeter with a flashlight. "He left in a hurry," she said. "Footprints again. Could be the same boots from the cabin break-in. And he left this." She held up a torn fragment of glove military-issue brown leather. Jessica felt her throat tighten. Later, Jessica sat by the window watching Bailey as he finally curled beside Ethan's bed. Her thoughts spun in circles: Jack's journal, the treasure he hinted at, the man in the woods, Lucas Grant. It was no longer coincidence. It was a pursuit. Someone believed Bailey still carried the path to something hidden, and that someone was willing to trespass to get it. The morning broke with a heavy mist blanketing the sleepy town of Evergreen. the kind that silences the birds and seems to hang just long enough to unsettle even the strongest hearts. Jessica stood at the kitchen window watching the birch trees sway in the weak light. Bailey sat by the door, his ears alert tail still. He hadn't moved much since the incident 3 nights ago except to guard Ethan. There was a tension in the air, coiled like a storm not yet formed. That morning, Bailey began pawing at the door. Not aimlessly, with purpose. He paced, then barked low, insistent. Jessica watched him unease, tightening her chest. "You want to go?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Bailey looked into her eyes, then moved to Ethan's bedroom and nudged the doorknob with his nose. Jessica understood. Half an hour later, she and Ethan were packed and ready. Jessica called Officer Lauren Mitchell just in case. "We're heading to Jack's cabin," she said simply. Lauren promised to be on standby. The woods were still wet from overnight rain branches dripping earth soft. Bailey led them, pausing only to sniff the wind or check behind. His body moved like a creature on mission, his golden fur slicked with dew. Ethan followed close, holding tightly to Jessica's hand. When they reached the cabin, the clearing was quiet. Too quiet. The last time they'd come here, the place had felt abandoned. Now it felt watched. Bailey didn't hesitate. He padded directly to the back corner of the cabin where a slightly newer patch of wood stood out against the rot. Jessica used her crowbar, prying up the loose floorboard. Beneath it, the earth was packed tight, but Bailey dug quickly, paws flying. A few minutes later, they hit metal. Jessica knelt, brushing away the dirt. It was a weathered metal box about the size of a shoebox, sealed but unlocked. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. Inside were several aged documents stamped with red, classified markings partially faded. Next to them, folded neatly, was a sealed letter yellowed at the edges. The envelope bore one name written in ink that had started to blur. "To whomever finds Bailey." Jessica opened it slowly. The handwriting was precise but shaky. The first lines hit like a weight. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I didn't want to disappear, but I knew I couldn't stay. Bailey, he's more than a dog. He's trained to find what I've hidden and protect those I care about. He found you because he trusts you. Take care of him. And if Lucas ever shows up, don't let him near this box. Jack Sullivan." Jessica's mouth went dry. She looked up at Ethan, who was quietly petting Bailey. He knew Ethan said softly, "Bailey knew we would find it." Before Jessica could respond, a twig snapped behind them. Lucas Grant stepped out from the trees. He was tall, lean, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, and a long brown coat that seemed too clean for someone who claimed to live off the grid. His eyes were hard, restless, always searching. "I had a feeling you'd come back," Lucas said, his voice low, cold. "Should have guessed the mutt would lead you straight to it." Jessica rose slowly, shielding Ethan with one arm, the box clutched in her other hand. "You're trespassing," she said firmly. "I've called the police. You've got no idea what that box is worth," Lucas sneered, stepping forward. "Jack owed me. That was supposed to be mine." "He didn't think so," Jessica replied, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "He left a letter. He knew you'd come." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "Give me the box." Bailey growled, deep and guttural. Lucas took another step. That's when Bailey lunged. He didn't bark. He didn't pause. He moved like lightning, launching at Lucas's side, knocking the man off balance. Lucas stumbled, fell to the ground, and scrambled back, hand reaching for something in his coat. Jessica saw the glint of a blade. "Bailey, no," Ethan cried out, but Bailey was already there, standing between the man and the boy, baring his teeth. Lucas hesitated. The sound of a siren pierced the quiet. Officer Mitchell's cruiser tore through the trees, headlights slicing the mist. Lucas turned and ran, disappearing into the woods. Lauren arrived moments later, gun drawn. "Everyone okay?" Jessica nodded, breathless. He tried to take the box. Lauren secured the scene, radioed for backup, then helped Jessica and Ethan back to the car. Bailey didn't move until Ethan called him. Only then did he turn away from the trees. Back in town, Dr. Harris came to check on Bailey. Doctor. Nora Harris was a small, wiry woman in her early 50s with silver glasses and a calm, precise demeanor. She had been Jack's chosen vet and knew Bailey well. "He's not just any dog," she said, checking Bailey's vitals. "He was trained for high-stress environments. Jack enrolled him in a federal PTSD service program. Dogs like Bailey are taught to detect changes in heart rate, body language, even smell stress before a human knows they're in trouble." Jessica looked down at Bailey, like a guardian. "Exactly," Dr. Harris nodded. "They're sometimes called gatekeepers, and they don't forget their training." She gave Bailey a gentle scratch behind the ears. He was protecting Ethan, just like he was trained to do. That night, Jessica sat by the fireplace, the metal box now tucked into her desk drawer. The documents would be handed over to the right people. But Jack's letter and Bailey were now part of their family's story. She watched Ethan curl up next to Bailey on the rug, their breaths sinking, as if they'd always belonged to the same rhythm. Outside, the wind picked up again, but this time the house felt safe. Bailey was home. A week had passed since the chaos at the cabin, but in Evergreen the air still carried a sense of solemn purpose, as if the town itself was catching its breath after holding it for too long. The fog had lifted. The skies had cleared. And in the Turner household, things were beginning to settle into something resembling peace. On a bright Tuesday morning, Jessica stood beside Officer Lauren Mitchell in front of Evergreen's local courthouse. Her fingers gripped a sealed manila envelope, the same envelope that once sat hidden beneath the cabin's floorboards. Inside were the classified military documents that Jack Sullivan had risked everything to protect. As promised, the box and its contents were officially being transferred to federal custody. Officer Mitchell, dressed today in a navy blazer instead of her usual duty uniform, gave Jessica a reassuring nod. "The Department of Veterans Affairs will make sure everything is handled with respect. Jack did the right thing, even if it took a while to bring it full circle." Jessica nodded, her throat tight. "I think he just wanted to be remembered. By someone who understood. And now he is," Lauren replied softly. As the documents were handed over, Jessica felt a strange weight lift from her shoulders. That part of the story was closed. But another part, one far more personal, was just beginning. That afternoon, she and Ethan walked hand in hand into the Evergreen Animal Services office. The woman waiting for them behind the counter was Deputy Registrar Paula Whitaker, a middle-aged woman with kind green eyes and short, silver-streaked hair. Her voice was soft, professional. "Jessica Moore," she said, "smiling here to finalize the adoption of a very special boy." Jessica smiled back and nodded. Bailey sat patiently at her feet, his leash, loose tail swishing slowly against the floor. He looked up at her golden eyes, alert and gentle. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid. He knew exactly what this was. "I've never seen paperwork move this fast," Paula said, as she handed over a single page and a pen. "When the sheriff's department vouches for a dog, and he's got this much of the town talking, people tend to pay attention." Jessica signed the form, her name steady. "He's not just a dog. He's part of our family." From behind her, Ethan beamed. "I think Mr. Jack sent him." Paula glanced at the boy, slightly puzzled. "Mr. Jack Sullivan?" Jessica said softly. "Bailey's first owner." Ethan nodded with quiet conviction. He didn't want Bailey to be alone. And he didn't want us to be either. Paula blinked, then offered a warm, knowing smile. "Well, he sure found the right family." As they stepped back outside, the spring sun warming their faces, Bailey gave a soft bark and bounded ahead just a little, his steps light as spirit, brighter than it had been in weeks. The leash hung loosely in Ethan's hand, more symbolic now than necessary. Later that day, Jessica brought Bailey with her to work at Haven Hills. The once drab nursing facility had started to feel different lately, like the presence of Bailey had stirred something within its dusty halls and weary souls. He was now an unofficial visitor allowed by special permission, and there was one resident in particular who seemed to change the most in his presence. Mr. Delaney. Once withdrawn, confused, and almost entirely unresponsive, the aging war veteran now sat upright in his chair near the rec room window. He was tall but thin, with a face lined by the deep grooves of memory and time. His hair had gone completely white. His hands often trembled, but his eyes, once dulled by forgetfulness, were brighter today. Bailey approached him slowly, stopping just beside his foot. Mr. Delaney looked down. "There you are," he whispered hoarsely. "My guardian angel." Jessica watched from the doorway, stunned. "You remember him?" Mr. Delaney nodded. "I told you. He was with us near Kunar, on that mountain. We lost half our men that day. The mortar came down hard. But that dog he pulled me out." Jessica knelt beside him. "You're saying Bailey was with you in combat?" He wasn't called Bailey then. Jack named him Shadow. His voice caught. Said he followed him like one. Quiet. Always watching. Always knew when trouble was near. Jessica glanced at Bailey, who sat silently, his gaze locked with Mr. Delaney's as if understanding every word. "I was supposed to die there," Mr. Delaney murmured. "But he dragged me out by my jacket. Jack told him to. Last thing I heard before I passed out was his voice, 'Go, Shadow, go.' And he did." Jessica felt the sting of tears. She placed a hand on the veteran's shoulder. "He came back, Mr. Delaney. He came home." The old man chuckled, voice cracking. "He never really left, just waited till someone needed him again." That night at home, Jessica sat on the porch with a blanket draped over her shoulders. Ethan was asleep upstairs, and Bailey lay beside her, his head resting on her foot. "Everything changes, doesn't it?" she said aloud. Bailey didn't move, but his tail wagged once. The wind rustled the pines, and somewhere far off a nightbird called. "He chose us," she whispered. Bailey lifted his head and looked at her. "I don't know how or why, but I'm glad he did." She bent forward, kissed the top of his golden head, and stayed there, forehead to fur, heartbeat to heartbeat, because family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about trust, about timing, about love found in the most unexpected forms. And sometimes it arrived with muddy paws, storm-soaked fur, and a name whispered in the dark by someone who simply refused to be forgotten. The first snowfall of December had blanketed Evergreen in a hushed, pristine silence. Outside, the wind whispered through the birch trees, and the distant mountains wore caps of white. But inside the Moore family's modest home, the warmth of the fireplace couldn't quite melt the growing heaviness in the air. Bailey lay on the soft rug near the hearth, his once vibrant golden coat now dulled with age. His breathing had grown labored slower with each passing day. Dr. Harris had called it congestive heart failure, a common fate for older dogs, but Jessica didn't need a diagnosis to see it in Bailey's eyes. He was fading. Ethan, now a little taller and a lot more thoughtful than when Bailey first came into their lives, never left his side. That night, as the wind howled and the flames danced in the fireplace, Ethan curled up next to Bailey. The room was still cloaked in that quiet only winter brings. Jessica sat across from them, watching as her son gently rested his hand on Bailey's head. "Thank you for everything," Ethan whispered. "You taught me how to be brave." "I love you, Bailey. You can rest now." Bailey shifted only slightly, let out a soft exhale, and closed his eyes. No sound, no struggle, just peace. The next morning, Jessica found them still in that same position. Bailey had passed quietly in the night, nestled in Ethan's arms. Marcus knelt beside them, tears falling freely as Jessica embraced her son. They buried Bailey beneath the oak tree in the backyard, the same tree where he had loved to lie in the shade during springtime. Ethan placed Bailey's collar and a painted pine cone atop the grave. Jessica added a photo of Bailey from that first stormy night he had come into their lives. Marcus carved a wooden sign and nailed it to the tree, "Always home." In the days that followed, the house felt emptier. No nails clicking on the kitchen floor. No warm weight curled by the couch. Jessica often paused by the window listening for a bark that no longer came. Ethan had grown quieter, though there was a maturity in his silence, like something had shifted inside him. One chilly afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from the Department of Veterans Affairs, forwarded from an old sealed envelope found inside the hidden box Jack Sullivan had buried beneath the cabin floor. Jessica unfolded the note written in Jack's steady hand. "If I don't return, let Bailey choose where he belongs. He has the soul of a guardian. He will know where he's needed." Jessica pressed the letter to her chest, eyes brimming with tears. "He chose us," she whispered. A few weeks later, during a walk through Birch Woods, Ethan veered off the path. Jessica followed closely behind until he knelt beside a tangle of brush. There, shivering beneath the thicket, was a small golden puppy. Its fur was damp, its ears drooped, and its eyes wide, uncertain, and yet somehow knowing. "He's all alone," Ethan said gently. "But I think he was waiting for us." Jessica knelt beside him. "What should we call him?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Hope," he said, "because Bailey taught me that we should never give up." Jessica wrapped her arms around both her son and the trembling pup. As they walked home through the snow, the wind stirred the trees above them, and in that moment they all paused. Jessica could have sworn she heard it, a single soft bark echoing through the trees, faint but clear like a promise whispered from heaven. There are moments in life when help comes not in the form of thunder or trumpets, but through quiet pause and warm eyes. Bailey wasn't just a dog, he was a messenger of grace. Through him, a boy learned courage, a mother rediscovered trust, and a forgotten war hero found peace in memories long buried. Perhaps in Bailey's journey we are reminded that God's miracles often arrive disguised as strays in the rain, as protectors in the dark, as companions when we feel most alone. It's easy to overlook the signs heaven sends, but when a soul like Bailey crosses our path, we must open our hearts and ask not why me, but what can I give in return? So if this story touched your heart, take a moment today to hug those you love, rescue something fragile, or simply believe again. Miracles are real. They walk beside us, and sometimes they wag their tails. If you believe God sends guardians in mysterious ways, comment Amen. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us love never dies and angels often have 4 legs. May God bless you and every soul watching.